G'day world, welcome to my stream. It's been a while. It has been a while. Why is my cam not focusing? Focus. Okay, all right. It's ANZAC Day. It is ANZAC Day here in Australia. What is ANZAC Day? Well, we're going to learn a little bit about it. We're going to do a bit of my old school, a little bit of my old school sort of stream, like what I did before. Used to do with the news and stuff. We're just to do a bit of learning about what ANZAC Day is about. And then I'm going to do a diorama builder. I have a World War II plane, and I've spoke about it in the past that I wanted to sort of do the World War II plane on ANZAC Day and talk about ANZAC Day and talk about that sort of thing, what it sort of means. We'll do some facts. So down here I've got this is the 2009 ANZAC Day dawn service in Western Australia, just from the wiki. Okay, so we'll switch over to my old scene, my old news scene that we used to use, so that we can just talk about it a little bit. So it is Friday, the 25th of April, 2025. ANZAC Day is on the same day every year, and it marks the anniversary of the Australian New Zealand Army Corps landing at Gallipoli in southern Turkey 110 years ago today. They landed in 1915, World War One. So ANZAC Day originally was about World War One. So today, the 25th of April, 1915, so 110 years ago, this is the date that Australia and New Zealand began their first major battle in World War One. So I believe that they'd already landed, the Allies, the British, I don't know about the US, but I know the British, I believe, had already landed there. They had already been there already in that place. And then Australia makes an entry in at Gallipoli. This was their first major battle. It differs from Remembrance Day, which is the 11th of November, which was the time that fighting in World War One ended. And that fight, so it was the 11th of November, so the 11th of the 11th at 11 a.m. And that's when fighting stopped. So that's when that gets marked. That's a Remembrance Day, whereas today is ANZAC Day. So the first major battle for the Australia-New Zealand Army Corps, right? So that's ANZAC, okay? The first ANZAC Day was observed in 2016, so basically a year after they'd landed, in remembrance of all the troops who served in the faithful Gallipoli campaign. So it was a failed campaign, yeah? And it's since grown to a day of solemn reflection and gratitude to all who served in Australia's military in any conflict. I got this off, I don't know, RSL site or something. ANZAC Day services happen across Australia, at the crack of dawn, literally at the crack of dawn. But also they happen in Turkey, France, Thailand, Malaysia and PNG, because Australians are spread so far and wide. So we have these services as well, especially in Turkey, that happens there, at Gallipoli itself. ANZAC Day traditions include a march. They have the dawn service and then a march, and obviously ANZAC biscuits, which are really yummy, and a game called Two Up gets played. Actually, I meant to sort of look this up to see whether we could see a video on it or something. Yeah, so it's I believe it's banned normally and it's only played on ANZAC Day. It's only legal on ANZAC Day. It's a traditional Australian gambling game involving a designated spinner throwing 2 coins, usually Australian pennies, into the air. Players bet on whether the coins will fall. Both fall with heads observe up, both with tails reversed up, or one known as odds, one of each. And it's traditionally played in pubs and clubs throughout Australia on Anzac Day, in part to mark a shared experience with the diggers. So, I don't know. I believe that it was kind of like illegal, like because it's gambling or something. I don't know. You can't normally play it, I believe, but I'm sure people just play it. But anyway, yeah. So, they play 2 up, and they play the last post. This, the thing on the trumpet, and they recite the Ode of Remembrance as well. So that sort of all occurs on Anzac Day. My grandfather fought in World War II, not World War One. He was in the Royal Australian Air Force. I don't have any of his actual medals. I believe these badges came off his coat or his hat. So this is his, I don't know if this will work very well. Okay, here we go. Maybe if I put the white paper behind it. Oh my gosh, I don't know which way to go. So this is the Royal Australian Air Force insignia badge that he had. It might have been on his his coat, I think. And he's well and truly passed now. And I don't know what this one is. It's this Cameron. Maybe we should look it up. I believe it's some sort of, come on, come into focus, some sort of Greek thing or something. I don't know. I don't know what that one is, but that was one of his badges as well that he wore. I think these are coat badges, yeah, like a big trench coat. Now, my grandfather, he wouldn't talk about his experience in the war very much. There was a couple of items around the house. He had an old torch that had a cover, a brass torch that had a cover that went over the front of the torch. And I asked him about it, and you could lift this cover up and down. And he mentioned that, it was to make the light, the cover was there to make the light shine down onto the ground, because you couldn't allow the light up. It would sort of alert aircraft or whatever to the vicinity if there was lots of light around, so it sort of dimmed the light a bit. He had a plane, which was quite interesting. This morning I was sitting here, and 3 old World War II planes, like the one that I'm going to make in this game, flew over the top of the house, quite close. And I think it's the sort of plane he was in. And so he was a rear gunner, what's called a rear gunner. Now, he had this plane which was made, it was a small model plane which was made out of bullets that had been melted down. He wouldn't tell me very much about the war, and he never ever participated in Anzac Day, Remembrance Day, or anything like that, because he felt it was a celebration of war. I don't know. He didn't like it at all, and I guess he became very much a peace advocate. My auntie, who I was talking to about a month ago, we had a little bit of a discussion. For some reason, my poppy came up, and she mentioned that like he was a rear gunner, but which I'd already known. But apparently they only survived for like 10 minutes. So I wouldn't be here if he didn't survive. They were quite important, obviously. Like they were at the back of the plane, sometimes under, I believe, as well. Like a ball under, like a cage or something underneath the plane. And he would that they were apparently incredibly important, obviously, to shoot down planes that were following, but survival time was not very long at all, but he made it through. And he was World War II, like I said, not World War One, but yeah, pretty. I can't imagine it. And, it's so scary where the world is today. And, I don't want to see my kids go to war for crap that rich men can't figure out, or want to get us all involved in. We don't get a say, we don't get a say. And that just makes me so angry and frustrated and worried for my children. I don't want this for them. So yeah, I thought that we would have a look at this morning's service in Melbourne. So this was really quite disappointing. I'm so sorry to our Indigenous people for how some people behave in Australia. Okay, so we're not going to read this story. I'll read the whole of the next story, and then we're going to listen to his speech. Let's give him the respect of listening to his speech. So some neo-Nazis turned up at the service this morning in Melbourne at the Shrine, and it was, I believe we might be able to hear it in the speech. I could hear it in the one that I played earlier to myself. So the booing and stuff, and it seemed to have gone on for a little while. They have arrested a dude. Yeah, this guy, Jacob Hersant. It was escorted from the ANZAC Day service by police. He is a prominent neo-Nazi. What the fuck were they doing there? What were they doing there? And they're booing the welcome to country. There's just no respect for the fact that these people never ceded sovereignty of their land, and the fact that these people also fought for Australia in World War One and Two, and other wars as well. There are definite Aboriginal service people out there, and here we have the new Nazis out there. We're going to watch some documentaries later on Nazis, not these ones, not sort of modern Nazis. We're going to look at some historical stuff so that we can learn from history. So we don't repeat these mistakes. But it seems some people learned from history that's how to do things. I don't know. It's pretty gross where we are right now in the world. This guy, Jacob Hersant, was the first Victorian found guilty of performing an illegal Nazi suit in public and was sentenced to a month behind bars. Now he's brought his friends down to the Shrine during Anzac Day and booed the welcome to country. So, hopefully he gets a big fine. Maybe he'll go to prison. Who knows? Booing. Can you send someone to prison for booing? And I'm not sure that I would advocate for that, but I just want the hate to stop. And it's just so ignorant. So we're going to read this one because I think this is quite important. It just gives another angle to why it's so disgusting. These neo-Nazis are in there booing welcome to country when these people served as well. just as much as anybody else that served in, and deserve just as much respect and commemorance for their service, you know? So so the hostility at Melbourne's ANZAC Day echoes the exclusion of Australia's black military history. Draped in a possum skin cloak against the black of the dawn, Uncle Mark Brown stood in front of thousands to honour the land on which the Shrine of Remembrance is built. Sorry, I seem to have picked up a... yeah. Okay. Hopefully I've cleared my throat enough. No? It like set in as soon as I started the stream. As he attempted to pay respects to his ancestors, a small group of people tried to shout him down. "We don't need to be welcome," they yelled. Oh my God. As Uncle Mark's voice rose, he continued his speech above the jeers, adopting a steely gaze out to the crowd, undeterred. It must have been a lonely moment for Uncle Mark, a Bunyarong and Gunditjmara man. But this was surely not the first time he'd had to stare down prejudice and racism. Uncle Mark is a well-known Aboriginal elder in Melbourne, where he often works with community organisations to bridge divides between his community and non-Indigenous Australians. On ANZAC Day last year, he stood at the shrine uninterrupted to deliver an address focused on reconciliation and the importance of understanding our shared history. This year, a group of far-right extremists was present at the shrine, and political leaders have been quick to condemn the disruption as disrespectful. The ugliness on display at Melbourne's War Memorial has shaken the Aboriginal community, Indigenous veterans especially. Kamilaroi, I don't know how to say these, and I'm very sorry if I pronounce them incorrectly. Kamilaroi veteran Dean Duncan was at the service and watched on in despair. "I will never attend an ANZAC Day service at the shrine again," he tells ABC News. Instead, he will now only attend smaller Aboriginal-led services to honour the Indigenous veterans. The outright hostility on display in Melbourne, albeit driven by a few, mirrors the long, quiet and painful exclusion of black diggers from the national conversation. What I do believe that the crowd, and it's a massive crowd. It was also the 110 anniversary. This massive crowd, they did clap and stuff, trying to they tried to sort of drown out the hecklers. Oh, g'day VS. Welcome to the stream. We're just looking into a bit of ANZAC Day before I jump into making a diorama of a World War II plane. I am in Australia, yes. I am in Victoria, Australia, and today is ANZAC Day, which is the Australian New Zealand Army Corps sort of day of remembrance. So the fighting Gunditjmara. "What about the Anzacs?" shouted one of the protesters. Presumably he wasn't thinking of the Aboriginal Anzacs, many of them from one of Uncle Mark's own mobs, the Gunditjmara. "Are there kangaroos near my home?" There are. There are, actually. Yes. Not right near my home, but like about 5 minutes away I could find a kangaroo probably. They are sort of common just on the outskirts of town. They have earned the name Fighting Gunditjmara due to their long history of service and sacrifice, including World War II hero Uncle Reg Saunders, the first Aboriginal commissioned officer whose father had served at Gallipoli. So his father served at Gallipoli. All right, he's the first Aboriginal commissioned officer in World War II. His father served at Gallipoli, and we just spoke about Gallipoli. That's the whole reason this all sort of started, right? Despite historical regulations preventing some Indigenous people from enlisting, First Nations people have served in every major conflict since colonisation. Like they fought in the Boer War, they fought in so many. They have served, right? But upon their return, they have served a country from which they have not ceded sovereignty. But upon their return, many veterans were not allowed in the RSL. Holy wow. Had their land and children taken and felt excluded and forgotten. Victoria's Truth-Telling Commission, URUC, has heard of ongoing anger in the Indigenous community about the denial of soldier settlement blocks to Aboriginal people who fought for Australia in the First and Second World Wars. Enormous strides have been made in recent years to properly recognise the unique sacrifice of black diggers, largely led by advocacy of Indigenous veterans and historians. In 2017, for the first time, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander veterans led the National ANZAC Day March. It was a proud and emotional moment for black veterans and their families who had become accustomed to being down the back, never up the front. Which is why it's so tragic in 2025 to see an Aboriginal man so callously shouted down during a service designed to commemorate all veterans, no matter their background or heritage. It was disrespectful to my own service and to all other people who served, said Dean. Those hecklers, they don't see past the colour. After next week's election, the incident raises questions for the incoming federal government about what can be done to counter the rise of the far right and to properly address the level of distress and mental illness in Aboriginal communities. And we just sort of disregarded them with the Voice. So, you know, what steps are they looking to take to actually improve this situation? It's kind of like after the Voice, we kind of forgot about it for a while, right? Anyway, the Aboriginal-led crisis line 13 Yarn says a large volume of calls it receives relate to Indigenous people affected by racism and abuse since the Voice referendum in 2023. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to our Indigenous that we, you know, that people were used against you and stuff, and I'm just sorry that we didn't recognise your voice. For Dean, who was posted to the 8th 9th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment as a 17-year-old. Wow, I don't even know how old my grandfather was when he went. I'm pretty sure he was like 21 or something. As a 17-year-old, which is still so young, the jeers reflect what he sees as a rising hostility towards Indigenous people. Post the referendum, it's emboldened people so much. They've got this backup to be blatantly racist, and they're protected by it by saying Australia voted and we don't want to recognise you. That's just so bad. He was at least heartened by the many people at the dawn service who applauded Uncle Mark to drown out the jeers. When we served, there was no colour. We all treated each other the same, but these hecklers, they don't see past the colour. That's just so sad. Okay. So we're going to listen to what he has to say, and then I'm going to put this model together, right, of this plane that I swear my grandfather, because it's very similar. If I don't know a lot about planes, but it looks very similar to the one that he used to have sitting on his counter that was made of these melted down bullets. Okay, so we're going to listen to his speech. Now let me see if we can get this. There we go.
I am Uncle Mark Brown, and I'm an elder and senior cultural heritage officer of the Bunurong people. I'm a Gunditjmara man on my mother's side, and I'm a Bunurong man on my father's side. And this morning, I'm here to welcome everybody to my father's country. Beautiful Bunurong country. But before we do that, We pay our acknowledgements and we pay our respects. We pay our respects to all of my ancestors. We pay our respects to all of my elders. And we pay respects to all of my community members, past, present, and emerging. And we acknowledge the continuous and unbroken connection to country for the Bunurong people. We also pay our acknowledgements and respects to all traditional custodians of Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, who work, rest, live or play on Bunurong country. It's Australia! We acknowledge their continuous and unbroken...
Oh my... Australia, you're on stolen land, bro. Their land. Oh my God. Oh, he was so brave to just like power through.
...connection to country for all of their people.
Ignorance.
And we thank each and every single one of them for being here with us. But today, on the sacred lands of the Bunurong people, we all gather in the spirit of respect and unity.
Do I like the Aboriginals?
And this welcome...
Sure. I have no reason not to. I like them as much as every other person, and I recognise they haven't ceded sovereignty. I recognise that we colonised their land, or our ancestors did. I mean, I'm not a direct ancestor of necessarily that original wave of colonisation, but certainly, you know, I'm a white person. I can't say that I've had much privilege, but like more than most Aboriginal people have experienced in Australia. Of course I like the Aboriginal people. They have a real culture. They're quite annoying. Okay. I don't know what's annoying. I don't know how they are annoying. They're just trying to exist. They're trying to be recognized. You know, I just don't understand why people are incapable of putting themselves in the shoes of others, and what it is to have your land taken and then to be constantly disregarded and disrespected, and like it was a huge impact on their culture, on their people. I don't see what's annoying about pointing that out. They're very rich history. They had pretty crazy pagan practices. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Aboriginal people. Are we really going to go down there? What, they don't... What? This is the sort of thing that I just find, like, how does that affect you? How is that a problem for you? What does that do to your life, and why is it crazy? Pagan practices basically are just looking at the land. They still have pagan practices, looking at the land, respecting the land that we come from. The earth does nurture us. They're not wrong. The earth nurtures us. And they were about looking after it their way, you know? I mean, I don't know. Crazy pagan practices is an interesting way to look at it. Nature, religion, I guess. It's the culture. We all come from different cultures. Stuff like human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, rituals involving occult practices. Who do you think they are? Human sacrifice? Where's this coming from? I've never heard about that with Indigenous, with Australian Indigenous. That's what paganism is. No, it's nature religion. human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, rituals involving cult practices. Seriously. And so what, I mean, have you looked at like just any institutionalized religion, like what it entails? Like they're nothing to really be putting up on a pedestal. Like we could really go into some quite nasty stuff that goes on in, well, just the Catholic Church itself, you know? Like I don't think anyone can, like, I just don't know how that affects you and why that is, you know, just let people be who they are. And so what? That's their culture. I don't believe there was human sacrifice. Like they weren't doing that sort of thing that I know of. And if that was the case, you know, it doesn't affect me. You just think that they shouldn't be celebrated. This is a commemoration service for the ANZACs, military service, Aboriginals that fought in the military, and he's just doing a welcome to country, welcome to this land. So it doesn't affect you. You think they shouldn't be celebrated. Well, you don't have to. That's your freedom. You don't have to celebrate them. It's my choice to go, hey, I think these people deserve to be respected. They never ceded their land. They were violently colonised. They were genocided in some areas of Australia. And I think that, you know, they deserve to be recognised. Yeah. Celebrated, I don't know, their culture, some of their cultural stuff's really great, you know, like you've seen an Aboriginal painting, they're pretty awesome. If you heard an Aboriginal Dreamtime story, those are also pretty awesome. So, you know, I think that there's nothing wrong with celebrating them. What are we going to celebrate? Western colonisation culture? Is that better? Is that any better, do you think? I'm going to finish listening to what this man has to say. Most Aboriginals are pretty horrific though. Okay, well, we might let you continue to think those things on your own. Good night. All right. I don't need that sort of thing in my chat.
It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to honour and respect the deep cultural heritage of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, whose elders and community members have generously looked after these lands for countless generations. My people have a deep...
See, they're screaming, what about the ANZACs? But they don't even recognise that these people fought. They are also ANZACs. His own ancestors fought and are ANZACs. It's totally disrespectful and totally ignorant. Racism is ignorance and fear. And like you said, it doesn't affect you, but you're willing to go and judge. Well, I judge you.
Connection to these lands, encompassing all of our rivers, our mountains, our coastal areas, and all of our beautiful bushlands that surround us today. Our traditional territory spans from the Werribee River in the west and moves to Diggers Rest in the north. We move over to the Dandenong Ranges, the Yarra Valleys, and down to Wilson's Prom. We encompass the top end of Tasmania, which we share with the beautiful Palawa people. French, Phillip, King and Flinders Islands are also ours. These are the traditional lands and territories of the Bunurong people that I welcome everybody to today. And as I said, we have a deep spiritual connection to our lands. And we have a strong cultural identity tied to our ancestral plains. All of our stories.
I mean, I find that pretty annoying. Like, we don't need to be welcome. Like, what sort of sorry people need to be saying this sort of stuff to someone who's just trying to, be welcoming to country and recognizing what their ancestors have done for this land? I think racism is annoying. I think ignorance is annoying. I think that people that think that it's okay to go and like pull up at a shrine like this and disrupt a service like this. Like, I'm a peace activist. I'm pretty much anti-war, but I wouldn't be rolling up here to do my protest. These people are disgusting. They are annoying. They are way more than annoying, and they are intolerable. And I won't be tolerating them in my chat.
Our traditions, our language, our culture, and Bunjil's law are interwoven with the very fabrics of the soils that surround us, reflecting my people's profound knowledge, wisdoms, and ongoing custodianships to all of our ancient lands. And as we gather here today, we recognise that this welcome is a part of our shared journey. It's a shared journey of reconciliation. And it's a shared journey of understanding. And by acknowledging and encompassing the deep ritual heritage of all of our people, we strive to foster mutual respect, cultural exchange, and a celebration of diversities.
And what's so hard about that? What is so horrendous about that?
And so on behalf of all those gathered here today, I extend my heartfelt welcome to my people's country. May our time together be filled with reverence, learning, and a renewed commitment to honouring and cherishing the Bunurong people and all the traditional custodians of this country. So Wamanjenka Balakiakya, Ngata, Bunurong Balag Bik. And for all those who do want to be here, you are welcome. We come with purpose. Welcome to beautiful Bunurong country.
Wow. Intolerance everywhere. Intolerance everywhere. Okay, so we have done that little part. Now I shall get the diorama builder happening. And I need to go check my dinner, potentially get it out. So I will put the pause screen on while Diorama Builder gets loaded up. And then we'll switch over to the scene that we're going to use for that. And we can watch, I have like a documentary on the Nazi dismantling of constitutional law in Germany. That's what we're going to watch. So let's go to the pause scene and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Okay. Not showing. Oh, there we go. All right. I have my dinner. I'm excited. I worked very hard today in the garden. I've been trying to get a little bit into fitness. Been going out doing walks. I either do walks or do a big day in the garden. And I did a big day in the garden. Actually, I was going to take a photo. Next time, I'll take a photo and I'll show the photo because I'm really happy with the progress. It's an autumn garden, unusually, but I've got so much spinach and I've done rows and I've done like trenches and yeah, and I've got so many different, I've got a huge variety of stuff that I've put in. So awesome. It's looking really good. So I'm really hoping that I'm going to have a mega autumn winter garden. I put peas in, snow peas. It's awesome. Okay, so what I have here, spin around. There it is down there. So, oh, it's not showing it. Okay, well, it is a plane and it won't take long. Like it's 270 pieces. I mean, I've done bigger ones on stream in the past and they don't take very long. So I'll do that and then I'll go and I'll work some more on my secret bunker. Because I've got a couple of docos. This one goes for an hour. This is the Nazi dismantling of constitutional law in Germany. I've got a couple of different ones. We'll watch this one and then I think I've also got a I've got a trailer, a small snippet from another documentary that we'll watch on another day, which is also about Nazis in 1939, but we'll just be watching a snippet of that at the end of this one. And then at the end, we're going to watch the history professor answers dictator questions from tech support on Wired. So first we're going to watch this one. I don't know how old this is. These guys like upload old documentaries and it's already like 2 years old, the documentary itself. So a sobering look at how Hitler and the Nazi Party manipulated laws to further their hate-filled agenda. People who were considered physically or racially inferior or disloyal to the state were deprived of their rights and often their lives under these Nazi laws. And when Germany was ultimately defeated, Nazi leaders were charged with crimes against humanity in the Nuremberg trials in an attempt by the world community to restore the rule of law. And people sort of carry on about, you know, the UN can't do anything, but it certainly managed to be useful then with the Nuremberg trials. The UN is useful as much as we're willing to see it as a point of authority. Just like in the US, if Trump just steamrolls past every order that the Supreme Court makes, then that will mean the justice system will lose power, Supreme Court will lose power, and you'd be able to say, well, the Supreme Court has no power, it's powerless, just like the UN is powerless, right? So as long as you give it weight, which they did for the Nuremberg trials, it was all sufficient for that. But then it pretty much got treated by a joke by the Security Council, you know, especially a couple of major players in the Security Council that treated it like a joke. And then, of course, when Israel didn't want to pay attention to the UN, when it was convenient to it, then it was like, we're just going to disregard the UN. Even though all of this happened because of, you know, the League of Nations and stuff like that gets together that fought for the freedom of, well, everyone in the end, but like, you know, fought to free Jewish people from concentration camps and things like that. It's something that's happening today, and people just poo-poo the UN and stuff like that. And of course, if you want to give it no weight, then it'll have no weight. But it had weight back then, right? And if we're just going to treat it that way, then expect Trump to also treat the Supreme Court that way. Everything is just, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the same sort of things. So we're going to learn from history and watch what happened in history and recognize that the same thing is sort of going down now. Yeah, especially, like one of the first groups of people that were targeted in Germany were trans people. Easy group to pick on. There's not many of them. You can marginalize them. You can disgrace them. A lot of people don't understand the whole thing around trans. And so in the end, they're an easy target for these fascists, right? A year ago or whatever, no one cared about trans people in college sport. I saw someone say today there were more, like Trump has more criminal cases or something than what there are trans people in college sport, sort of comparisons like that get made. And so we're seeing that sort of alarmism and reactive kind of politics that's being used, and it's certainly being used here in Australia. And then they go and they take people like those neo-Nazis and they try to bring them in, they make them part of their base. And in the end, Trump can't control that sort of thing. I know that Dutton would never be able to control them here in Australia. But they play off them, and they want their vote. They want that hate so that they can use that hate to attack other people, Some people just get their jollies hurting other people, even if it hurts themselves. Anyway, we're going to watch that. I've turned the music off for the World War II one. I don't know why it's not showing us the little plane. If we put the mesh on, I can show the mesh for all so that y'all can at least see sort of what we're heading for. And then we have to do it by level. Make it. Yeah. Oh, I want the actual level. All right. So this is why we're watching the documentary, to learn from the past, to recognize the same sort of things coming into our world today. Yeah. And how we can choose marginalized and small groups of people and make them feel worse, make them even more marginalized. And it's just horrendous, the world that we're in at the moment, and the intolerance that people have for others. Does it affect you? Think about it. Does it really affect you? And let's watch. And I'll build this plane. And I said, this is similar, very similar, I swear, to what he sort of was in. And that's very similar to the 3 planes that flew over this morning as well. All right. Now, hopefully everything will
This
run
channel is part
smoothly.
of the History Hit Network.
In post-World War I Germany, the law had been a most respected entity, with the country regaining some stability, in part due to capable lawyers and judges, many of them Jewish. In 1933, no law could inhibit Germany's political and military rise to power. In a step-by-step process, the National Socialist government dismantled constitutional law, usurped justice, and created a lethal totalitarian system that soon engulfed Germany and all of Europe. Redefining the nation as a pure political and biological organism, the Nazi government imposed legislation that reinforced its ideological program in all aspects of German life, with a focus on race, business, religion, and medicine.
That's the same. Even the medicine. RFK bringing us a second pandemic with the measles. Apparently the measles was declared extinct in America in the year 2000. Now they have 800 cases.
Bulletin: Adolf Hitler is dead. He is dead, and how he died, the world little cares. For Hitler's death, millions have prayed, and millions are now thankful for justice. 1920, Hitler began. He was considered just a joke then, a raving crackpot.
That's what we thought about Trump. He's just a
At
joke.
the dawn of the National Socialist Party in Munich in 1923, a little-known Austrian political upstart by the name of Adolf Hitler naively attempted to overthrow the Weimar government of President Friedrich Ebert. Historically, the Bavarian beer hall served as a locale of camaraderie and occasional ideological meetings.
The beer hall putsch took place in November of 1923. The Weimar Republic, which started out in 1920, was in crisis. Certainly the Weimar Republic had all kinds of obstacles to try to overcome. Its leaders were seen as responsible for Germany's surrender in World War I, which no one in Germany expected. They were also seen as responsible for the Versailles Treaty, which all Germans felt was incredibly unfair, even though both the surrender and the need to sign that treaty were really dictated by the generals, who felt that Germany could not sustain further military action.
On November 8th, with 600 stormtroopers led by Ernst Röhm, Hitler descended upon the Bürgerbräu-Keller and shouted out, "The national revolution has broken out. The hall is surrounded." After several speeches by putsch leaders, Hitler left, wrongly believing the revolution had begun.
If you love history, then you'll love History Hit. Our extensive library of documentary features everything from the ancient origins of our earliest ancestors to the daring mission to sink the Bismarck. History
This
Hit
is a
has
good
hundreds
channel.
of exclusive documentaries with unrivaled access to the world's best historians. We're
I don't know
committed
what
to
the
bringing
ad's for,
history
but
fans
this
award-winning
channel, this
documentaries
timeline
and
channel, they have
podcasts
excellent
that you cannot find
docos.
anywhere else. Sign up
Free.
now for a free trial, and Timeline fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code TIMELINE at checkout.
Having created a political movement out of what was a very small German Workers' Party, Adolf Hitler, inspired by what Benito Mussolini had done in Italy, where he had been able to organize a march on Rome, which put him in a position of power, felt that he could do the same thing. Now, in his case, he had to start from Munich in Bavaria, which is where the Nazi Party had begun and built itself up. And his plan was twofold. He was going to coerce the leaders of Munich and Bavaria into moving out of his way, and he was then going to march on Berlin.
At 11 a.m. on November 9th, Hitler and his followers attempted to take over Munich public buildings. But the armed police
See, we really have no excuse. We have this history. We know it. It's not like it's lost history either.
and army, alerted to the Nazi Party's actions, fired upon the marchers. This left 16 Nazi martyrs whose blood soaked the swastika banner of the newly formed Nazi Party.
In 1923, there was a great deal of economic turmoil in Germany, and Hitler decided to seize the occasion to try to dismantle the democratic process in Germany and essentially establish a dictatorship. The interesting part of the beer hall putsch is that the putsch itself was so poorly disorganized that he never left the city limits, so that he ended up being tried in a local court. Had he made it outside of the city limits, or even on his way to Berlin, he could have been tried for treason in the national court and in fact have faced a death sentence.
Oh my God. It is just so... It's almost like a carbon copy.
Landsberg Prison, where Hitler wrote his credo of hate during his imprisonment in 1924, following the unsuccessful beer hall putsch. This was a hallowed shrine to official Nazis, but to American GIs, it's just a jail that Hitler never should have left.
Although Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, he was imprisoned less than 9 months, during which time he continued to build his party network and dictate his blueprint for the Nazi party program. Mein Kampf provided the seminal ideas for the party's attack on Jews and communists, based upon political and racial laws.
Once Hitler realized that he wasn't going to be able to take power by force, he decided he had to use
No, that came after the communists, came after the socialists. Just because the socialist thing was in their name. I think we've done a thing before about how, like, why it had socialist in their name and why people try to equate Nazis with it, but they're not.
Political processes to attain power. And he manages to build the most successful political party in Weimar Germany and become the most successful leader. And, you know, it's amazing because up until the elections of 1930, it doesn't look like he's getting anywhere. He had this idea, build it and they will come, that if he created the infrastructure for a wide-scale political movement, the opportunity would come along. He recruits, he develops propaganda techniques, he learns to use technology, he recruits a successful group of lieutenants.
And see, the Heritage Foundation just looked at this history and just went, right, how do we implement it and make it even better with the technology that we have today and the means that we have today?
And when the Great Depression strikes, and once again the Weimar Republic is vulnerable, it is Hitler and the Nazis that are in this position to capitalize on that and move to power. But he had always said that he was going to use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. And he was going to use the rules of the Republic to destroy the Republic.
Oh my God.
Certainly the Reichstag fire, which occurs in February of 1933, helps him.
Reichstag is gutted by red incendiaries. Chamber where deputies meet in Berlin Parliament is destroyed as a result of a communist plot.
Here you see the Reichstag, the German House of Parliament in Berlin, which has been seriously destroyed by fire.
The Reichstagsfire was essentially the 9/11 of Germany. Adolf Hitler had been chancellor of the country for less than a month. There were crucial national elections a week away. And suddenly, this very symbol of German democratic process goes up in flames in an arson attack. The Nazis exploited this event to great effect. The Hitler government immediately blames the communists for this, and the next day Hitler approaches the president and he says, we need to suspend civil liberties.
He sees the opportunity in it.
Was hesitant, but ultimately signed, and that essentially was the first major step in the dismantling of the democratic system. In the atmosphere that existed at that point, a lot of Germans were willing to sacrifice certain liberties for the sake of national security. And once again, I think, given what the United States went through after...
So long as you attack that person for me. Pretty sure.
9/11, I think one can understand that. And I'm not saying that the dynamics or even the situation was the same, but it can, if one wants to try to imagine what it was like in Germany at that point.
We're getting closer to being able to imagine exactly what it was like. And like what you're doing today to fight against the shit that's going down is what you would have done in Germany. So, you know, would have you gone along with all of this fascist shit just so you can hurt somebody else that you don't like? Just so you can take the freedom of someone else that you don't like, even if it hurts you?
Germany changed with the seizure of power in January 33, dramatically, but not immediately. It was actually an extended process that the Germans called the Gleichschaltungsprozess.
By labeling the Reichstag fire as a terrorist attack by the communists, Hitler convinced President Paul von Hindenburg to suspend all civil liberties.
Hindenburg did not like Hitler.
Again, now we're using like Palestinian protesters to suspend civil liberties in America.
Could not even stand to be in the same room with the man, but the political constellations of things were such that he appointed Hitler as chancellor. Hitler then, along with the other Nazis, set about systematically dismantling the various pieces of democratic process. Some of it through legal means, some of it just subverting the system and ignoring certain laws.
The first major step in overthrowing the justice system occurred with the suspension of all civil liberties and the installation of protective custody, or Schutzhaft.
What happens in the enabling law is by this time, the Communist Party, as a result of the Reichstag fire, had been declared illegal. And that eliminates a powerful bloc of anti-Nazis from the Reichstag. At this point, Hitler goes to the Reichstag and asks for a 4-year dictatorial regime, which would suspend most civil liberties and virtually create a state of almost permanent emergency powers.
Oops. We need to translate. We need Nazi translations. Hold on.
Permanent emergency powers.
Here, one law will determine all activity. The Volk does not live for the economy.
At the Kroll Opera House in March of 1933, Hitler proposed the law for removing the distress of Volk and Reich. To keep the Volk secure, the communist ideological enemies were rounded up and imprisoned.
The economy does not exist for capital. Rather, capital serves the economy, and the economy serves the Volk. Do you think that's what Trump doing? Because, like, he's just like doing this pump and dump thing. And, like, I don't know. He's playing that stock market. They're buying low. I don't know. Capital serves the economy and the economy serves the Volk.
One of the pro-communist anti-Nazi lawyers caught in the web was Hans Litting, who had defended communists against the wrath of violent Nazis. Even daring to...
And we're seeing them go after, like, lawyers and shit.
questioned Hitler on the stand for 3 hours in a 1931 trial. Hitler never forgot what he viewed as humiliation at the hands of Littin, and eventually deemed the prominent attorney an enemy of the state. Sent to a concentration camp, this honorable half-Jewish attorney paid for his integrity. After 5 years of Nazi torture in a concentration camp, Littin committed suicide. In March 1933, in an effort to confine the enemies of the state, an old munitions plant on the outskirts of Munich became the first Nazi concentration camp.
Germans, defend yourselves, don't buy from Jews. I'm not saying that's what it says on the screen.
Toward his next enemy, the Jews. From that time on, virulent anti-Semitism dominated the philosophy of the fast-growing party throughout the 12-year Reich.
So is it all because of that guy, that lawyer guy that he didn't like? Nazi economic boycott of Jewish businesses, April 1st, 1933. Because of that lawyer. Attention Germans, these Jewish owners of the 5 PS stores are vermin and are gravediggers of German craftsmanship. And I'm going to say this shit. Germans free yourselves from Jewish tyranny. Don't buy from Jews.
Hitler's 25-point National Socialist Party stressed the importance of segregating Jews from Aryan society, and soon led to abrogating all of their legal, civil, and political rights.
Oh, goodness. I think it's the one that she's wearing is, I'm the biggest swine in town and consort only with Jews. As a Jew boy, I always take only German girls up to my room. What the fuck? Why are humans so sick to each other? I guess it's not all of us, right? I mean, I think most people just want to exist, just want to live their lives. And these people inflame everybody. Like the leaders, it's these privileged few who set everybody upon each other. Jews preparing to leave for Germany. Preparing to leave Germany.
On April 7, 1933, Parliament established its first major law to curtail the rights of Jewish citizens, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. According to the Aryan paragraph, Jews were legally excluded from civil service positions. On the same day, a law was imposed that prevented Jews from admission to the bar. This legal assault had devastating consequences for Jewish lawyers. For the most part, Aryan attorneys were pleased, and few voiced any negative reaction to such violations of justice.
The history of Jewish lawyers in Nazi Germany really follows an arc from the unification of Germany in the 1870s through the Nazi era. With the unification of Germany, Jewish lawyers for the first time were allowed to enter into the legal profession. And they flowed into the legal profession, and they became very prominent in the legal profession. When the Nazis came into power in the winter of 1933, they immediately tried to reverse the emancipation of Jews and the liberal legal order which had allowed Jews to become part of it and in which Jews had played such an important role. The Nazis round up its opponents. It arrested within several days 4,000 of its political opponents. Among them were Jewish lawyers. But at that point, the Nazis...
And I do believe that's coming. I do believe, well, he's already sort of rounded up some political opponents for Israel. That's for Israel, though, for whatever reason. That they're doing the bidding of Israel. I don't know why. But yeah, I do believe that Trump will go after his political opponents in due course, especially those, like, it'll be this graduated step where they'll denaturalize people and things like that. And then it'll be, you know, he's already sort of talking about sending even citizens. And sure, he goes, oh, they're going to be like the worst of the worst. We're going to send the worst of the worst citizens off to Ecuador, you know, to not, what is it, Ecuador? Yeah, the prison in Ecuador. But with due process gone, anyone could go, and it won't be for necessarily for violent crimes. And even then, there should be due process. Like, due process keeps everybody safe. I guess we shall see whether he go. I think I did like a poll. I don't know who put the poll out, and it was like, do you think he'll go after his political opponents in the next year, in the next 4 years, or not at all? And I was like, in the next year. I reckon he's pushing it as much as he can. And I reckon he'll find the excuses he needs to go after political opponents as well. Or even just by ignoring due process and just rounding them up and going, oh, look, you know, going, this Abreu Garcia guy, like, they just keep claiming he's part of a gang. They keep claiming it over and over and over again, and they're not going to bring him back. They're not going to do the right thing. They're just going to keep claiming the same thing over and over again, and that's what they'll do. Without due process, how do you prove that you're not a gang member or whatever, violent, terrorist, or whatever they want to accuse you of? Without due process, you can't. So, you know, I do think that he'll go after his political opponents in... You know, I don't know whether he'd go after Biden necessarily, but I do think that he'll go after outspoken voices, especially if they can be denaturalized. Things like that. I do think that we will see that within the next 12 months.
Were arresting its political opponents, not Jews as Jews, not Jewish lawyers as Jewish lawyers. But within several weeks, it became clear that the Nazis were going to target Jewish lawyers as well. There were attacks on courthouses organized by SA thugs who would enter into the courthouses or would throw out Jewish lawyers, would throw...
I know that there was like at least two that I saw, immigration lawyers in the US that got like threatening letters from the government saying they should deport themselves. Here is a picture of Jewish lawyers lining up to register.
Throw out Jewish judges. Violence served a purpose for the Nazis. They used it to its full extent. They used it quickly, and they scared people. But the Nazis also realized that violence had its limits and that they could also use law in order to promote their agenda.
Hitler claimed that Nuremberg was the most German of cities, with a tradition that aligned itself with the nationalism of the 1930s. Known from medieval times as a city that burned Jews at the stake, Nuremberg continued to fuel animosity during the Third Reich. The city hosted the party rallies and also served as the venue for the promulgation of the Nuremberg Laws. Hitler used the 1935 National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg to launch these infamous race laws. For Hitler, blood purity ensured the vitality of the 1,000-year Aryan Reich as defined in the Nuremberg Laws of September 15, 1935.
Vereerde die Menschen nährt und aus der Fruchtbarkeit seiner Familien die Nation fort erhält.
Hitler used the 1935 National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg to launch these infamous race laws. In this way, the government revoked Reich citizenship for Jews and prohibited Jews
What is that? I don't understand it.
from marrying or having sexual relations with individuals of German or related blood.
These Nuremberg laws, they were the ones that really prescribed citizenship for Jews. Citizenship was something that would be granted, like a license. Only citizens had rights of citizenship. The second law was about keeping the purity of race.
And that's kind of true in America too, like with the citizenship laws. But again, if you can't prove you're a citizen because there's no due process, right? A due process protects, keeps everybody safe.
And it begins by prohibiting any kind of marriage between an Aryan and a Jew. It spells it out. If there is already a marriage, it's invalid.
Wow.
There were prescriptions, no kind of sexual relations. That was going to take a little bit of policing.
No love for you.
And
That's because they're such loveless people.
there was a provision that no non-German
1939 incel right there.
other female servant could be kept in the house of Aryans under 45. That was going to go into effect a little bit later. The bulk of the law went right into effect the next day.
Ist der Versuch der gesetzlichen Regelung eines Problems, das im Falle des abermaligen Scheiterns dann durch Gesetz zur endgültigen Lösung der
I'm sorry. We'll have to go back. Okay. The law is an attempt to legally regulate a problem which, in the case of repeated failure,
Versuch der gesetzlichen Regelung eines Problems, das im Falle des abermaligen Scheiterns dann durch Gesetz
must then be transferred by law to the definitive solution of the National Socialist Party, which I think they're sort of trying. I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding it, but I think they're sort of trying to imply the same sort of thing. A little bit with like Trump and the administration sort of going, we're the ones that have voted in, and the Supreme Court can't overrule us because we're the ones that, you know, they can't have more power than the person that was elected by the people. I think that's the reason, that's the excuse I've heard Vance using.
Lösung der nationalsozialistischen Partei übertragen werden müsste.
The party stands behind all three laws, and with it, and behind it stands the German nation.
But with these laws, there was so much exclusion. Jews were really being excluded from public life. They had no rights.
It didn't matter whether you were a religious Jew or not to Hitler.
Every little Jewish baby grows up to be a Jew. Yeah.
If you had a quarter to an eighth of your background Jewish, you were Jewish. So it wasn't a religious thing. It was a racial, ethnic. And so if you had a Jew, even if you converted, you were still Jewish according to the racial laws, based on your background, based on your lineage. And so it was a eugenic and genetic and hereditary. And it was all caught up in social Darwinism.
Which we saw a hint of that with Musk.
But it was a genetic, and that was a different kind of anti-Semitism.
Through legal machinations, the Jewish community was also forced out of the medical profession and denied civil rights.
Basically, starting out in 1933, it was made extraordinarily difficult, almost impossible, for Jews to practice either profession of law or the profession of medicine. They were essentially outlawed from those two professions. And they were a major portion of those professions at the time. So, some people argue that this was an economic move, that the doctors and lawyers were happy to get rid of the Jewish doctors and lawyers. And that was part of it, but that's one reason it was supported so much, that no one really came out against it. But it was really a move to get rid of the Jews. It was a disgrace that
just one little step at a time.
And lawyers didn't stand up for the Jewish doctors and lawyers, but I think that can be two reasons for that. One was they actually were fine with the Nazi propaganda and racial hygiene and really believed the Jews were infecting the national body of Germany. But economics was not irrelevant. It made those professions much scarcer, therefore they could charge more money, therefore they were more revered, so they had self-interest in that as well.
Jewish doctors, violators of women, and murderers, the predator. Wow. They're just, Trump says the same thing about, like, the Venezuelans and whoever else he wants to round up, doesn't he?
In the Nazi blueprint for a healthy society, those with disabilities had no place.
And we've even seen that. They want to go after. And I found out today, no, was it yesterday, that RFK Jr. did that horrible speech the other day where he, God knows what he thinks autism is, but he defined autism in his brain for us and, said absolutely dreadful things. And so now he's like in control of everything to do with the medicine, yeah? I've kind of forgotten what I was going to say. And then he had said a few months ago, like a month or maybe more ago, that he wanted to get people that were on antidepressants and certain drugs like that and get them off their antidepressants and put them in a labor camp where they could work to become healthy. Just saying that's what he said.
A Berlin memorial today commemorates some 200,000 deemed not worthy of life by Hitler's manipulation of the law.
So the Nazis proposed racial laws beginning in 1933. That law was called the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. Now, I think even the language, the wording of that law is important. You're not preventing diseases, you're preventing diseased offspring. And what that law recommended, based on the science of the day, was that people who were considered not to be contributing to the genetic health of the body of the Reich could be forcibly sterilized. Yeah. And in fact, that law actually said 50,000 Germans a year ought to be sterilized, even if it was against their will, for the good of...
These days, even though, like, it's such a surreal place that we live today, it's a real world, it's crazy that I can actually imagine him implementing this sort of thing. I can imagine Trump twisting things and his supporters all for it. I can imagine it because that's how surreal this world is. There was a time where we were going, that's just crazy. Like, how would that be a thing? This is 2025, right? Why are we doing this? Didn't we learn? Didn't we agree that this was a bad thing?
The Reich. Those racial laws were important because they codified what authors Hoke and Binding had suggested in 1920 in a book in which they coined this phrase, life unworthy of life.
It began with the sterilization programs of Germans,
frightening,
of the retarded and the mentally ill. And so the sterilization program, 1933, the sterilization law, which allowed compulsory sterilization for the feeble-minded, which was a catch-all for anybody you wanted to sterilize. But the sterilization program moved into the child euthanasia program. And the child euthanasia program moved into the adult euthanasia program. Doctors involved in all of this. There were genetic sterilization courts where 2 physicians and a lawyer sat on the sterilization court. One physician had to be an expert on eugenetics or hereditary, and so they decided almost universally to allow sterilization. But after that, moved on to the euthanasia program, which is a misnomer, by the way. It was a murder. It wasn't euthanasia. These were not terminally ill people. It was just murder.
That's horrible.
The strategy.
I just don't get it. Why some people think they're better than other people. I don't get that. I don't get it at all. I don't get it at all. Why can't people put themselves in other people's shoes and like consider their experiences? Why? Why do people do this to others? Why do people in power do this to other people? And then why do people vote for people like Trump and that so they can hurt other people? Why do people have that constant need to hurt others? I've had a pretty tough life, and it's not. I'm more interested in enjoying the life that I live, not trying to hurt others. What a waste of time with my life. Why waste your life away like that? Haven't you got better things to do?
Hitler's political regime was to undermine, dismantle, and decimate all ties to traditional religion. The government attempted to have the folk aspire to a single national Reich Church under Reichsbishop Ludwig Müller.
Evangelical Youth incorporated into the Hitler Youth. I know. Trumpy wants to change all the education system, and I see that as an avenue for him to get into the younger generations and then like brainwash the whole Hitler Youth thing, yeah?
Im Namen unseres Führers Adolf Hitler und im Namen der ganzen deutschen Jugend.
The big Zeppelin. Münster, Germany.
Bishop Clemens von Galen risked his life by giving an anti-euthanasia sermon in Münster on August 3, 1941.
That's the guy standing up. Someone standing up. It's like that lady, the priest that gave that sermon at the inauguration or whatever it was, and then he was like, she's so evil, and she was just preaching like Jesus said to give to the poor, stuff like that, and bring us your, whatever masses, whatever it is, I don't know.
Asia policy was scaled back.
In 1937, the relationship between the church and state in Germany had reached a point where there was great tension, specifically on the freedom of Catholic organizations, the arrest of Catholic clergy, and the situation of Catholic schools and religious education being taught in schools, and the future question of Catholic youth groups and ministry to youth.
And now we've got, so we just had a pope that apparently he'd like sort of admonished Trump and JD Vance for their stance and their, you know, their inhumane sort of viewpoint on life. And, you know, he was a woke pope, so they say. And, well, yeah, now the great unknown. Are we going to get someone that's another woke pope, or are we going to go backwards again in line with kind of the rest of the way the world's going at the moment?
And with that, the German bishops were so concerned that they petitioned the Holy Father, the Pope, to do something about that, to try to protest. The result, with input from the German bishops, was an encyclical, Mit brennender Sorge, with burning desire, with burning concern, stating that the German Catholic Church was under persecution and that the Reich government was in no way following what it promised to do in the Reich-Vatican Concordat agreement. That statement was actually read on Palm Sunday from the various pulpits throughout Germany. The Gestapo tried to confiscate any of the printed copies throughout. They allowed them to be printed, but then they confiscated them throughout the Reich. But the information and the protest was lodged, and it was heard very clear.
The Reich passed the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. And while this did not require the churches to employ only non-Jewish pastors, many in the churches, certainly not all, but many sought to implement that policy in the church. There were antagonistic policies on the part of the Reich towards the churches. So in 1937, the confessing church seminaries, which had been operating for a few years, were closed down. They were declared illegal, so they had to go underground to talk about the Bible, to train people for ministry and these sorts of things. Then in 1939, all of the confessional schools, both Protestant and Catholic, were closed throughout Germany. So there was a very antagonistic approach on the parts of the regime. So when we talk about the persecution of the Christian churches, and in particular the Protestant church, I think it's important to emphasize that the churches were rather aggressively pursued by the Nazis in the early years from 1933 to 1937. There were plenty of laws that were passed against them.
Interesting.
In the Third Reich, Jehovah's Witnesses faced a unique choice with regard to their faith.
And to see how they have grown, we have seen how he has guided them as they made the truth their own.
Well, they behaved them like other traitors. For example, if women weren't prepared to work in the factories to construct weapons, they were sentenced to death. And that had been the same with men who weren't prepared to go to the army. They didn't have a particularly...
That's what I'm so scared of, because, like, it's not our fight and we don't get a say.
...feeling against the belief system of Jehovah's Witnesses. They didn't know the system. They only had the notion that Jehovah's Witnesses didn't adore the system. They weren't prepared, for example, to do the Hitler greeting, to celebrate Hitler's birthday. It was a great day in National Socialist Germany, and that was sufficient. That was it. And they were surprised how strong these small group of believers resisted them.
In the Third Reich, Jehovah's Witnesses faced a unique choice with regard to their faith.
Witnesses were offered to sign a paper to end their relationship with the organization, with the Watchtower Society, and then they could be free. But they didn't do that, and that's the difference to the situation of the Jews. The situation of the Jews, even if the assimilated Jews who didn't even know that their fathers and grandfathers had been Jews, hadn't any chance to flee the system because of their blood.
The Jews were the most persecuted for both religious and racial reasons. From October 1939, they were relocated into large urban ghettos in Warsaw, Lwów, Lublin, and Krakow.
We should also do like one day, I don't know, we should try and find like a documentary on the Japanese, like internment camps in the US.
To control these communities with a false sense of law and order, the Nazis established the Judenrat, a Jewish council within each ghetto. These forced liaisons between council members and Nazi overseers still remain a sensitive subject today.
Once you are in the ghetto, you basically in the camp to die. All the laws, Germans start with the legal things. They come to the country and they say Jews cannot have a property, Jews cannot have radios, Jews cannot have fur. I mean, all the occupation laws function before the ghetto. Once you are in the ghetto, it's just waiting for death. There's no more law in the ghetto. There are law, but there are Jewish law by Jewish Judenrat. Jews were already deprived of the basic things, and then creating of the Jewish district, of the ghetto, was the final German occupation law, which was based, of course, on a big lie, on a hypocrisy, that actually now, where Jews were already second-class citizens, and to protect them from anti-Semitism, from the conflict with the Christian population, apparently it will be better for them if the part of the city will be designated for them, so they can have their own governance. So my father, who was an engineer,
oh, that sounds familiar. Oh.
In woodworking, construction, was working for the needs of the Jewish Council of Judenrat.
That is the most controversial question about the Shoah. It's about the Jews collaborating. Some say of their own will, some say that they've been forced to, but they were collaborating with the Nazis.
Probably a mixture of
now,
both.
The big question is, which kind of collaboration was it? If it was voluntarily, then of course it's a terrible thing. But since we know that the totalitarian regime of the Nazis made people to do things that they would never do.
I'm sure there was some that got advantages out of it, but like I'm sure most were like, we're gonna die if we don't.
In otherwise, and in the concept of what Katsetnik, he was one of the inmates in Auschwitz, and then he became to be a writer and a witness in Eichmann trial. He called it another planet. So in this other planet that have its own rules, have its own language even, people acted differently because they were under a force, under a threat, and they had to manage somehow their own communities. They had to survive. That was always like that. That's how they survived.
The only controversy was a kind of ethical one, whether a Jewish person should help Germans to keep order. They were keeping order with the Jews under Germans' orders, obviously. Of course, the other solution would be not to have any community organization. It was absolutely a necessity.
On December 7, 1941, Himmler reinforced Hitler's directive Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, a policy that summarily bypassed the law by relying upon special German courts to sentence suspects in occupied territories to concentration camps. Under the cover of darkness, they simply disappeared. In time of war, treason was punishable by death. As chief judge of the People's Court, Roland Freisler, the hanging judge, frequently chose to enforce the death penalty for many of those who stood before him pleading for justice. Between 1943 and 1945, the People's Court sentenced approximately 7,000 people to death. Maniacal in his tone and harsh in his judgments, Freisler oversaw two historical cases: the members of the White Rose and the conspirators of the July 20th, 1944 assassination plot against Hitler. At the University of Munich, members of the White Rose resistance produced 6 leaflets against the Third Reich. Hans and Sophie Scholl, along with their colleague Christoph Probst and their mentor Kurt Huber, were deeply committed to the high ideals of the White Rose movement. Condemned as conspirators against the government, they were sentenced to death for treason during wartime.
You've got to be loyal whether you agree or not. Oh my God. People's Court trial concerning plot of 20th of July, Judge Freisler presiding. Joseph Weimer, well, you're part of the black faction. That's obvious from looking at you. That's obvious. It can't be otherwise. It's funny how important the office of civil attorney, which you held, probably must have been, but you never... even became a lawyer, that you never even became a soldier when you reached that age, and then from that point on you were subject to military service. It speaks to your attitude that you waited until you were required to perform service. You delicate good for nothing. Oh God. Yes, delicate good for nothing. You waited until you were required to perform service. And where did you go?
Ja, keine Früchtchen. Die haben gewartet, bis man die Dienstverpflichteten. Wo sind sie hingegangen? Своим головам, гвардейцы! Огонь!
This is part of the reason why my grandfather didn't want to go into these memorial things, because there was nothing to memorialize, I guess. He didn't... I don't know. I wish he talked to me more about his view and about his experience. We learn from our elders, you know, and he could have shared a lot with me. I'm a very anti-war person, and so he could have shared with me these stories of why he felt the way that he felt, you know, the extreme trauma that he obviously experienced but was never really dealt with because of the time. You know, the era.
Outside Stalingrad, the icy winter becomes a fiery hell.
stories about the atrocities committed by the Nazis began to leak out of Europe, primarily in 1942 and 1943. We actually have documentation from the British in particular, in which British officials are already talking about death camps.
Yeah, they didn't know at the beginning. They didn't know this was happening. Like, we're aware. We're on the internet. Everybody's aware of what's going on. But they didn't know what was happening until, like, very close to the end of the war, from my understanding.
Places where
what did he say,
Jews
41, 42?
Were being murdered by the hundreds of thousands by poison gas. You can find references to this in government documents from the British already in late 1942, early 1943. So there was a level of awareness already of the scale and the immensity of the crimes being perpetrated. Of course, in 1943 then, Battle of Stalingrad, early 43,
Frankly, they kind of didn't care. A lot of places didn't care about the plight of the Jews and what was happening. It was only once it started affecting them that they cared.
Stalingrad is one of the major turning points. It really looks from this point forward, after the defeat of the Sixth Army, that Nazi Germany's days were numbered.
This was Kyle and Kessel with a vengeance, but the Nazis were getting Kesseled instead of the Russians. And on February the 2nd, 1943, after 162 days of the heaviest fighting in the history of warfare, the last shot was fired. Peace came to Stalingrad. In the shattered streets, the blasted ruins, the ghastly evidence of their ordeal, the defenders of the city greet the rescuing army of the dawn. Stalingrad is free. The Nazis had capitulated.
General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity.
You see the Allies now beginning to think in terms of what they're going to do with the major war criminals, as they were called. These were the leadership, the leading figures of the Nazi government, Hitler, Goering, Goebbels, and so forth. How are they going to be treated? Churchill and his legal counselor, Lord John Simon, were of the view that the major war criminals were essentially outlaws who did not have to be given their day in court, but could in fact be taken, arrested, identified, of course, and then executed without the benefit of a trial.
These generals, 24 of them, who had covered themselves with such glory and such medals on the fields of Poland and Norway and France, they now had only their past glory to comfort.
Wow.
Very clearly, the Soviets did not have in mind a trial or a proceeding along the lines of an Anglo-American litigated proceeding. They had in mind instead a show trial, not unlike the Stalinist show trials of the 1930s, in which Stalin was able to identify his alleged enemies, charge them with various imaginary crimes, and secure their conviction and then have them executed in the 1930s. This is the proceeding which they wanted to impose upon the major war criminals. The Soviet foreign minister, Molotov, had already talked with the Allies on behalf of the Soviet government and tried to persuade them that the best way to deal with the major war criminals was by means of a special international tribunal. Stimson was of the view that a special international tribunal could be used in which the major war criminals would be prosecuted, but they would enjoy the same kinds of due process rights which any American accused of an offense would enjoy, and the right to hear the charges against them, the right to study the indictment, the right to counsel, and the right to defend themselves in a fair proceeding.
And so, right, so it was fine back then to use that, like, and to bring these people to court now people are like dissing all over the UN and the International Court and stuff like that. How do we deal with these sort of things then? If we're, if we're just going to disregard the whole, like, the only reason that UN and things like that have any weight to them is if we give it to them. And really, we should, to cooperate as properly as a planet, and to bring people to justice, or bring justice for people as well.
Nuremberg remained a focal point for the National Socialist Party, hosting popular rallies and political congresses starting in 1927. It continued through the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, and again in November 1945, the focus was on Nuremberg, as the city became the seat of the International Military Tribunal to address war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The drums of doom begin to beat for 24 top Nazis as Nuremberg becomes the scene of the War Crimes Tribunal. Among the ruins of this former shrine of Nazism, an ordinary jail houses its former big shots. Each has a solitary cell and is forbidden to talk during exercise. Under indictment are Arthur Seitz Inquart, former Gauleiter of Holland. Julius Streicher, fanatical
I just don't understand why people want to take away this means of bringing these sort of people to account. And they just get more and more emboldened because everybody's decided to disregard what the UN and the International Court does, like its authority.
Rudolf Hess, one-time adjutant of Hitler, and Hermann Goering.
And really, it's happened because the criminals themselves are the ones that are disregarding it, and everyone's like, that's okay. That's all right. It's the criminals themselves. They're the ones disregarding it and making everyone else believe that the International Court and stuff has no relevance. Because the criminals are the ones that want to take advantage of that. Okay, it seems my... Oh. Wow. That was cool. Maybe we can, make this into, a short. All right. So I have completed this. I can't see anything else that needs me to click on it. So I believe all of the achievements for this have been done. How do I get rid of all of the things off the screen so that I can take a picture? Activate. Oh, that helps. That helps. Now let's do the... Oh, we need these on for the short, surely. And maybe, is there a light over there? Yeah. Have all the lights on. Maybe open the doors to the church. Okay. It's so cute. So cute in all its violence. That's awesome. Alright. How do I take a screenshot? Yo, we did it. We did it. No, that's not great. This sort of... Maybe we could go from above. Maybe that would be cool. Bit messy. Something like that, maybe? Wow. That's pretty cute. Woo. Okay. screenshot there. All right. So I'm going to switch over to the secret bunker and see if we can get a bit of that done. How cool does that look? We should function F12. There we go. That's pretty cute. All right. Let's go and work on the secret bunker and finish this documentary.
U.S. prosecutor at Nuremberg, Robert Jackson, stated in his diary that the court was charged with establishing a rule of law in the place where it had been said there would be no more law.
What is the advantage of conspiracy? It afforded the government, the Allied government, with the opportunity to charge the Nazis with a substantive offense as well as participation in a criminal organization, which meant that you did not necessarily have to show an individual criminal act committed by the defendant. What's interesting about conspiracy, again, is that it connects all of the individual charges against the Nazis. So in addition to charging with the Nazis with war crimes or with crimes against peace or crimes against humanity, they are also charged with conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, conspiracy to commit crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. So yeah, conspiracy, again, this notion of a criminal organization, the criminal plan to conquer the world, that was the foundation that underlay the entire case, especially on the American side.
One after another, the prosecutors came forward to state the case against the criminals. The first to speak was Robert Jackson.
In the prisoner's dock sit 20 odd, broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led, almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. It is hard now to perceive in these miserable men as captives the power by which, as Nazi leaders, they once dominated much of the world and terrified most of it. We will show them to be living symbols of racial hatred, of terrorism and violence, and of the arrogance and cruelty of power.
I hope we can do this with Trump one day.
When the Nazis embarked on aggressive war.
And all of these sycophant
The core theory
crazies.
of the Nuremberg prosecution is that the aggressive war itself was a crime. It's an overarching theory of criminality, and then within the war there are battlefield war crimes. But really, from the time Germany went on the march in 1939 into Poland, there was Allied thinking, particularly American and British thinking, that this was illegal, it violated treaties, it was criminal.
Raphael Lemkin provided Jackson with the foundation for this international law, establishing a paradigm for prosecution of war crimes. Based upon his research of the massacres of more than 1 million Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, Lemkin created the hybrid word genocide.
The deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation. All right, so we have a definition, the first definition.
The very term genocide had only been coined a year before the Nuremberg trial started. It was coined in 1944 by Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish-Jewish advisor to the U.S. War Department. That term genocide was already used as a descriptive term at Nuremberg.
You know how many people would go, oh, well, the word genocide didn't exist, so genocide didn't happen? You know how many people would, I bet you there are people out there that think that. Same way that they go, oh, Palestine didn't exist. Was there.
But it wasn't until the UN Convention of 1948 that genocide became recognized as its own independent crime in international law.
In an incremental way, expanding from Germany into the East and occupied nations, Nazi perpetration is a visible thing. What it adds up to, and that it's a planned extermination venture, is something that is very barely understood, not just during the war years, but even as they're embarking on prosecution. They're really almost sort of discovering what we would call the Holocaust as they're prosecuting it and getting evidence and realizing the enormity of what they're dealing with.
No.
This would be a way of showing the superior.
So they found them in the work camps and like in the concentration camps, and like freed them, but I guess they weren't aware of the sheer scale of what took place.
Political power, the superior moral power of a kind of a liberal democratic regime, right? So by not pursuing a purely political strategy with respect to the Nazis, but by giving them a fair trial, it was a way of saying, we're gonna give you the chance you never gave your enemies, and it's gonna show that we're stronger and that this is a better path for the future. So it was there was a moral argument for it,
that's kind of what they take advantage of.
There was also a very profound kind of political argument that this would be a more effective tool for preserving the peace going forward.
The Allies chose to take the moral high ground by providing fair trials. 22 high-ranking Nazi
and
leaders
it's the right way to go. You can't become what you hate, right?
on trial for crimes against humanity and crimes against the peace. The historic Nuremberg courtroom,
you can't let these awful people turn you into who they are.
is still used for trials today.
The Nazis committed astonishing crimes that we're all very familiar with. Nuremberg was not in the first order a Holocaust trial. It really was, as I mentioned, it was a trial about the launching of aggressive war. But nonetheless, if you look back at Nuremberg, the prosecutors did a pretty impressive and a pretty responsible job of bringing the crimes that the Nazis had committed against the European Jews to the courtroom.
The extensive trials concerning Nazi criminality
Why don't they respect that same courtroom today?
have continued into the 21st century, with attempts to balance both justice and mercy.
Then there are a series of Allied trials. The most famous of these are the so-called successor trials, also held in Nuremberg before an American military tribunal. These prosecuted functional elites from throughout Nazi society. So there was a trial for doctors, there were a trial for judges, there was a trial of the high command of the army, right? So a series of kind of trials of different elements of the Nazi elite. But there were also Allied military trials, Soviet, British, French, and American, of war criminals lower ranking, right? So the Americans held a trial at the Dachau concentration camp, or a series.
And this is one of the reasons too. They don't want the higher ranking people to be, because they know that if they were to give the International Criminal Court any power, any weight, then that would mean that they would have to bring forward American war criminals and things like that. Yeah. So that's why they don't, and even here they're saying it was just the lower people. When Abu Ghraib happened, that was just the lower people, that not the higher ups, that got in trouble over that shit.
Trials at the Dachau concentration camp in which hundreds of Nazis were prosecuted. The British had their own trial program, as did the French. The Russians prosecuted about 30,000 Germans for war crimes. Now, these were Russian trials. How fair they were, is anybody's guess. But given the level of Nazi criminality, I always say it's a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel. Even the Russians managed to find a lot of guilty people in that context.
As the Cold War broke out in the wake of an apocalyptic conflict, history had to be rewritten, reframing the Nuremberg trials within the context of victor's justice. Nuremberg still stands as a memorial to international justice, a reminder of the devastating consequences caused by unlawful manipulation of constitutional law for political and racial purposes. The criminal leaders of the Third Reich forced humanity to pay a heavy price.
And it's going to happen again. It sucks. Selfish people that just want to pull us into this shit. Selfish, insecure. Mentally ill people, frankly, want to pull us into these horrible wars. Wow. That was good. I learnt stuff. I do need to go to the toilet, but first I think what we'll do is we'll look at this trailer because it's kind of, you know, it's got a lot of old footage as well. This is, I believe, a 1939 Nazi rally that occurred in it was in America. Madison Square Garden in 1939. So this is a clip from a larger documentary that I want to watch on another day. So this is called The Power of Gossip, the larger documentary. So we will watch that at another time. But today we'll just watch the clip so that we get an idea. And because we just finished that one, I just want people to realize that it was never really sort of extinguished from the world, you know, and that this was going on in America even, like look, let's just look at it. And this is where these people that we see today, you know, they're the ones that are like, we fucking lost, now we've got to get back what we lost. We've got to hurt other people.
The Ratsies are going to celebrate George Washington's birthday at Madison Square Garden, claiming GW to be the nation's first Fritz Kuhn.
In 1939, 20,000 Nazi sympathizers stage a rally at Madison Square Garden.
The symbols of America and the symbols of Nazism sit side by side. So you get a large banner behind the podium of George Washington, flanked by swastika flags and American flags.
Winchell cannot allow the event to go unnoticed by the American people.
Jewish Moscow directed domination.
In every corner of the land, America was nauseated. The American press unanimously condemned it as the vilest sacrilege ever perpetrated in the name of American freedom.
And yeah, that's what they use. Oh, it's our freedom to throw up Nazi salutes. Fucking hell.
As Hitler's forces occupy Paris and threaten to invade Britain, public sentiment in America remains strongly against intervening. The America First Committee, founded as a student anti-war movement, takes a dark turn when Charles Lindbergh becomes its spokesman. While most of the country reveres the heroic aviator, when Lindbergh praises Germany and is given a medal by the Nazis, Winchell is quick to go on the attack.
Lindbergh made a speech in Des Moines Thursday night, an unmistakable appeal to anti-Semitism.
We cannot allow the natural passions and prejudices.
Lindbergh asks his audience, who's leading us to war? It's the Jews.
The British, the Jewish, or the administration.
And then he slips into some of the worst anti-Semitic tropes. And why are we getting this message to go to war? Where?
Just sounds so
Where are we getting it
familiar,
from?
isn't
Well,
it?
we're getting it from the media. And don't the Jews control the media? what he's saying, Jews aren't Americans. Our government, our press, the Jews are not part of our.
I can't stand the hypocrisy of today.
In December 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor puts an end to all debate about intervention. Winchell feels vindicated.
The importance of the Japanese attack is that war between the U.S. and Hitler is imminent. This will mobilize the efforts of the whole American people.
So we're going to watch that on another day. It looks super interesting to me. I don't know when. Don't know when we'll watch that one, but we will. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll come back and we'll watch. I have a Dictator. I need to change the name also of the video we're watching. I have this one. It doesn't play straight away. History professor answers dictator questions. I think that right, it's a pretty good sort of segue into that. All right, so we're just going to go to the pause for a moment. And I'll change the name before I forget. Of the current video that we're going to watch. And then I'll just take a quick run to the toilet and then I'll come back and we'll watch this thing. And then, doesn't fit, does it? We take the wired out. And maybe we just take a space out of there. That fit it nicely. There we go. And we need to change. It's just at wired. All right. I'll put it on the pause scene and come right back and finish a couple more of this. I don't know that I'm going to get the whole thing done. There's a couple more levels on this secret bunker, and I did have like couple of like a nuclear bomb documentary or something that I wanted to watch maybe one day when I finish this. I guess we'll see, because it's going to be half an hour. This thing about this history professor thing is like half an hour, so I might finish it in that time. Anyway, I'll be right back. we're back. Why does it lose the game? That's so weird. All right. Another half an hour on this little doco. That should be plenty of time. And then I'll end the stream. I'll be back another day with some more documentaries, games and watch, or perhaps design. I'm really keen to do a design one, but it would probably have to be like a co-working stream or something, because I want to be able to monetize my design videos. Ultimately, if I'm doing my own designs, I would like the content that's up in the little square to not sort of be copyrighted and take ownership of my content. So all right, how do I start this one? Here we go. Let's see, she might be a bit loud. We'll just check.
I'm Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. I study authoritarianism. Let's answer some questions from the internet. This is tech support dictators. At System Kumar 999 asks, bro, WTF is fascism? Fascism is a one-party state, classically, with an all-powerful dictator at its head, meaning no more separation of powers, no independent judiciary. Mussolini in the 1920s coined the term fascism. He also said everything in the state, nothing outside the state. So the state reaches into areas that in democracies, the state has no place. There's no more trade unions except the state unions. Employers and employees were in the same union, and that tells you what kind of union it was. Fascism is also classically expansionist. The conquest of territory, imperialism, is intrinsic to fascism. There is no sense of fascism without violence. Fascists truly believe, whether it's Hitler or Francisco Franco in Spain or Mussolini, that violence is the way you change the world. They declare one category of person as an enemy. It could be a racial enemy, as in Nazi Germany. It could be a political enemy, as it was in Italian fascism and for Francisco Franco.
Why do they think that way?
But that enemy must be exterminated. So the state organizes itself around the practice of violence. And regular people are trained to become vigilant and informers and use violence themselves. So violence is at the very core of fascism. Malice Liddell asks, why is Putin shirtless in so many of his pictures? Putin takes up where Mussolini left off in using his body as an emblem of strength. Mussolini stripped off his shirt. He was the first leader ever to do that on camera. And that stood for Italy's strength and dynamism and modernity. This idea of the dictator being the man everyone should look up to is very old. It goes back to the fascist years. This is a period cartoon making fun of Hitler. Goebbels, his propaganda minister, was depicting him as a kind of demigod. Dictators and authoritarians pose as the macho men, but they also create a climate in their countries
because they are so insecure about the fact that they're not macho.
Of a kind of lawless masculinity that says that a real man should be able to have anyone and anything he wants without asking for consent. And so Berlusconi created such an atmosphere in Italy of misogyny that the United Nations issued a special report after he had been in and out of power for a decade, saying that there was grave risk to Italy's women because of the rise in domestic violence and hate crimes against women. Thebang asks, what defines
Wow, that's actually interesting in regards to like Australia, because we have massive domestic violence problem in Australia, like huge. A woman dies, like, I don't know, it's some ridiculous. But we had like, I don't know, we've had a lot already this year. And it's I think it's a woman dies every 4 days or something in Australia at the hands of a partner. So, you know, we can acknowledge and talk about how domestic violence happens to both sexes and is carried out by both sexes, but for the most part, women suffer it, yeah. And it's at the hands of very insecure men. I can promise you they are so insecure that the only way they can get power is by dominating their women and other people around them if they can.
It comes from the verb to dictate. That gives us a clue. So a dictator is somebody who wants to get his way, doesn't care about public welfare, often is very, very corrupt, steals from the people, manipulates people through propaganda. They don't agree with the separation of powers, so the executive power becomes overwhelming in a dictatorship. A dictator is a leader who wants absolute power, someone who does not want his authority to be checked by any institution. And so he proceeds to take those institutions apart, to void them of all people who are not loyalists, to create his state in his own image and make everything be about him. At Angel Uma 5 asks, dictatorship, authoritarianism, autocracy, are the three forms of governance really different? Authoritarianism is a political system that often is dictatorship. You can have civilian dictatorships like the fascist dictatorships. You can have military dictatorships. Nowadays, some of the authoritarian leaders don't correspond to the one-party dictators of earlier times, like Mao or Hitler or Stalin. Autocracy is another name for the political system of authoritarianism. We have democracies where you have voting rights and the will of the people translates into the leadership, and autocracies where the leader does their best to stay in power no matter what the people think. Kozlowski from Reddit asks, how do dictators maintain power when it seems that most of the country is against them? Dictators use the authoritarian playbook. The playbook is, while you're running for office, while you're building up your power, you want to discredit journalists. You want to call them fake news or vermin or communists. And authoritarians do this because if evidence of their corruption comes out or their violent acts, they need the public to not believe the press, to think the press is lying. So there is no other voice telling the truth. The truth is gone. The Nazi term was the lying press. Today we talk about fake news. Many dictators use what today in Russia is called the fire hose of falsehood. This is a high volume of lies, half-truths, conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories are as old as propaganda. The fact the Jews were supposed to be controlling the globe, that was a fascist conspiracy theory. Dictators also maintain power by creating an atmosphere of terror, of intimidation, whether it's physical violence against enemies of the state, or today they harass people with lawsuits, with smear campaigns. They try and ruin you because the goal is to get you to self-censor. Then you're doing the dictator's work for him. AVJ164B from Reddit asks,
which admittedly I'm sort of, like I don't really want to stream as much anymore or talk as much on social media because these awful people are out there saying awful things, and it just makes you want to, back away and not draw attention to yourself in case you become target next.
What are the differences between a fascist dictatorship
and a communist? We have to speak up. We have to speak up, though, for the more vulnerable,
Dictatorship. They do many, many things in common. They have an all-powerful leader with a personality cult. They use propaganda. The difference is in who the target is. So fascists go after leftists. And although National Socialism and Italian fascism took originally at their very beginnings from the left, as soon as they constituted into parties, their main enemy was the left. The most consistent targets of Nazism and fascism were communists and socialists. So fascist dictatorships are anti-communist. Obviously, that's one huge difference from communist dictatorship. There, the targets, the enemies are counter-revolutionaries, anyone who's going to put the march of the revolution into jeopardy. And so Mao killed millions and millions of people, justifying it as getting rid of counter-revolutionaries. revolutionaries. Jay Anderson asks, what are the most common personality traits tyrants and dictators possess? They are narcissists, meaning they care only about themselves. Dictators attract attention and adulation because they tend to be very charismatic. So they're very good performers. They're very good orators. They will do anything to preserve their power. For example, Benito Mussolini, the first fascist dictator, in 1924, he had his main political opponent killed. And in order to escape an investigation, he declared dictatorship. Dictators tend to be paranoid. They construct something called the inner sanctum. This is an inner circle of advisors, and very common is that it includes family members. There's a whole history of sons-in-law being given important positions, from Benito Mussolini, the fascist, who had his son-in-law as foreign minister. Pinochet used his son-in-laws and put them at the head of the privatization agencies, so they made a lot of money. They also end up in this kind of cocoon where they start to believe their own
with
propaganda
Trump originally
and stop
anyway.
making good decisions. Vladimir Putin.
I don't know if he's got his family in there as much this time, has he? Trumpy? I don't think he
Invaded
has.
Ukraine in 2022 without consulting his
They went, fuck that, we don't want to do that shit again.
military or his economic specialists adequately. And so the
I think
military had huge
the
losses.
son-in-laws might be in, but I don't think Ivanka or any of them are really following. I don't know. There's a couple of them that went over to Israel or something, wasn't there?
At the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. More generals died than since World War II at the beginning, because Putin did not listen to criticism and objective feedback. Dictators don't have any moral code. They will ally with anyone. Think about Hitler, the fascist, allying temporarily with Stalin, the communist. Think about today, Xi Jinping, the communist, allying with Vladimir Putin, the far-right leader. So that old Machiavellian saying, the ends justify the means, perfectly sum up the dictator's personality. At Vopicule June asks, why do dictators have statues and pictures of themselves all over the countries they oppress? Dictators have giant egos, but their secret is that they're very insecure. The rules of personality cults have not changed for 100 years. You have to be the man of the people. You speak in a plain language. You connect with the people. But you've also got to be the man above all other men, the man who's untouchable, the man who's kind of like a god. So they build statues of themselves to give a sense of this godliness, of this omnipotence.
That's what Trump wants
so
to
the
build
statues are their way of saying, I'm going to be here for 1,000 years. So dictators want to be omnipresent. They have so many reminders of themselves in every way, rituals, statues, books, photographs, and they become kind of inescapable. Take the Heil Hitler salute in Nazi Germany. Anytime you went into any social context, you had to perform it. You both used your hand to salute, but you had to say out loud, Heil Hitler. This brought Hitler into the conversation, into every conversation, even though he was not physically present. And what you were doing is saying you were submissive to him and wishing him good health. This corresponds to the desire of the dictator to be everywhere, and people should not have social relations without the dictator being part of them. And that's also why their populations get really sick of them. Mr. Cornfield asks, how do dictators come to power? They can be appointed, as the classic fascists were. Mussolini was appointed by the king. German elites, politicians brought in Hitler. Nowadays, dictators can come to power initially through elections and then become dictators. For example, Vladimir Putin, when he was put into place, he was backed by the oligarchs. At the beginning, he was not an all-powerful dictator. It takes people years to amass enough power to do that. About
I don't know when this came out, I swear just after, a month ago, but maybe it was filmed before Trump, or maybe like came in, or maybe she just wants to steer completely away from that. Might have been filmed before he got in.
Of
I don't
authoritarian
think so.
regimes in the 20th century were created through coups. A group of soldiers and generals, they just take power. These can be civilian coups or military coups, but the point is that they impose themselves on power forcibly. At George Forrester 17 asks, WTF is a, quote, self-coup d'etat. A self-coup is a variety of coup when the leader is already in office. Perhaps you are the leader and you've lost an election. Well, you just refuse to leave. That's what Nicolas Maduro did in Venezuela. That's what Donald Trump tried to do through the January 6th insurrection.
Might
but in that case,
do.
it
We have
failed.
the hats. We now have Trump 2028 hats out there, apparently. $50 each, made in China.
Of South Korea declared martial law instead of having to be impeached. In that case, it was promptly dismantled and he is under detention. The same thing happened.
$50 each because of the tariff.
Happened in Peru in 2022. President Castillo was about to be impeached, so he refused to leave. He tried to have martial law. It was, again, very swiftly taken care of, and justice was served. The joke was that President Castillo started his day as president, and he ended it as a prisoner. It's very important to find perpetrators of self-coups accountable. This next question is from Kai. Did y'all know Hitler tried to overthrow the government during the beer hall putsch in 1923, but failed and was jailed? I did know, and it's important for everybody to know this history now. So Hitler tried to overthrow the government. He was put in jail in 1924. That's where he wrote Mein Kampf. When he came out, he was ranting and raving with his racist diatribes. He was not taken seriously, although several German states did prevent him from speaking publicly because of his hate speech. But then he promised to obey the Constitution to get those bans on his hate speech removed. And he proceeded to build up the Nazi Party over the 1920s. And then the Depression hit and social unrest increased. The left parties increased. And so German elites in 1933 decided to appoint Hitler, who by then was the leader of an increasingly popular party, to get rid of the left for them. So the German elites who brought Hitler into power thought they could control him and use him to get rid of the left. And then the rest was history, where they were not able to contain him and he ended up controlling them. Midwest Mama says, many dictatorships criminalize abortion. China, Russia, several others say it's a woman's duty to breed as many children as possible for the state. That's correct, and we can ask why that is throughout history. Dictatorships, even in the case of China, where they had a one-child policy for many years, have now started to reverse this. And dictatorships in particular that have fantasies of national purity, of designing a perfect race, or of having more, as Viktor Orban says, Hungarian babies to combat the number of immigrant babies. All these different reasons are why many dictatorships and authoritarian states encourage the right kind of women to have babies. Along with the political opposition, journalists, LGBTQ people, women have been the enemy of the strongman. And every regime acts to take bodily autonomy away from women, take their agency away, and criminalizing abortion and rolling back or
so they can control a baby situation
is part of that. This next question is from Karen. Sake. Do Americans want to live in a dictatorship? Many Americans have no idea what dictatorship entails, but have been convinced that democracy is failing them and have seen dictators held up as superior role models. They have been conditioned by the media, by President Trump, to feel that autocrats, that dictators, whether it's Xi Jinping, whether it's Vladimir Putin, are superior brands of leaders. Studies have shown all over the world, about 30% of the population holds authoritarian leanings that are often expressed in parenting styles, in how they think about authority. Are you kind of a mini dictator at home, or are you a collegial collaborative type? These people can get activated if a demagogue comes on the scene. For almost 10 years now, Donald Trump has appealed to certain groups who are more comfortable with authoritarian contexts. He created a big tent for every kind of political extremist, every kind of racist, from people who were Southern racists to neo-Nazis. Those people who already have authoritarian views on the world can be very seduced by a politician who comes and says, I am a strong man. I will decide things for you. I will bring order into society. And it becomes a natural meeting of that kind of person with that kind of leader. And so together, all of this created an environment where many Americans felt that they could see themselves in some kind of political system that's not a democracy. Shark Boy from Reddit asks, how do dictators actually make their money? The history of dictatorship and the history of corruption are completely entwined. At their extreme, you have something called kleptocracy. That is when it's a state of thieves. An example was Gaddafi in Libya, where the leader and his cronies were stealing from state agencies. They were expropriating private citizens' factories. They were taking over state agencies and funneling the money to Swiss bank accounts. The same thing is true of Putin's Russia, which is a fully formed kleptocracy, where Putin and his cronies kind of plunder, for example, Gazprom, the state energy conglomerate. They take profits out of state agencies. So instead of working for the people, the agency works to fund the dictator. And the money today goes less to Swiss bank accounts than to offshore accounts. For example, Vladimir Putin, after 20 years in power, is now one of the very richest men in the world. So dictators make money in an illegitimate fashion, which is why they use propaganda, violence, repression to make sure that none of their secrets come out.
No one takes
Based
it from
Mike
them.
Lee writes, name a fascist dictator whose agenda entailed limiting the size, cost, and power of government. Well, Senator Lee, there is one, Augusto Pinochet, the bloody military dictator of Chile who came to power through a US-backed coup and made Chile a laboratory of neoliberal economics, privatizations, deregulations, cutting social services. And at first, this provided a boost to the economy, mostly to giant corporations, including American corporations. But within a few years, it caused bank failures, massive hardship, and people went into debt. And so the long view is that we can think of dictators as always expanding the government and causing a lot of waste and bloat in the process, actually. But even when they cut the size of the government, it doesn't end up well. Johnson Tao says, I don't understand. Why do people support dictators? It can seem strange that people support dictators who take their rights away, because what dictators want you to do is not only...
She kind of explained it before when she talked about what sort of person are you at home? Are you a dictator at home? What sort of parenting style? I think that kind of really brought it home for me because, you know, experiences. I'm a very inclusionary, to a fault, inclusionary parent. So my kids are involved in every decision.
Portray other people in your communities. You're going to inform on them. You're going to look the other way when your loved ones get taken away by the secret police. They also want you to betray yourself. They want you to lose your moral compass, to self-censor. Dictators are very skilled at posing as saviors, at creating crises or exploiting crises and then posing themselves
as saviors for people that don't need saving even.
Solution. Whether it's an economic crisis or...
Like incel people that think that, you know, that masculinity is disappearing and they're at risk of, I don't know what they're fucking scared of, because they can be as masculine as they want. Just let other people be who they are too.
The perception of social unrest, one of the classic dictator narratives for 100 years,
not
is
being
that
masculine.
Only the authoritarian is going to keep people safe against the threat of immigrants coming across the border. Now, there's a grain of truth always to this, because immigrants too come over the border. But what dictators do is say that immigrants are coming over the border to rape our women, to take our jobs, to dilute our population because they're the wrong skin color and the wrong faith. And so the same excuses for 100 years are used to justify their national purity campaigns. Mussolini used to talk about black, brown, and yellow people, that's his words, coming across the border and having too many babies. These are old narratives, and they work because they make people fearful for their security, for their family, and then the dictator is there to say, I alone can fix it. Snowflake.
Yeah, and because people are scared of differences, they don't understand something, a different culture or whatever, and so that makes them scared as well.
100% pure masshole says, why is he even having rallies? He's referring to President Trump. US presidents don't have rallies. Dictators have rallies. Hitler had rallies.
Yeah,
authoritarians love
kinda
adulation and they love opportunities to perform.
But
Because
it's also
rallies
America.
are an occasion where people come out in mass numbers to show their loyalty.
They do these rallies, and it's so weird looking at it from a country that does not revere their prime minister like as a super celebrity like they do in America.
And what dictators care about more than anything is people showing loyalty to them on camera. And so that's one reason, whether they're right or left or anti-colonial or imperialist, they all have rallies. Early on, Joseph Goebbels, who later became Hitler's propaganda chief, he realized that Hitler was terrible in a studio. He was wooden. He needed the energy of crowds to come alive. And that's why Goebbels hit on this idea of having rallies nonstop. And that has remained a feature of dictatorship. Think of Mobutu Sese Seko in the Congo, constantly had rallies where he dressed up. His thing was being the leopard. He sat on a throne. These are shows of power and omnipotence. Here's a question from the political discussion subreddit.
When's
Does the
Trumpy
internet
gonna
improve
get a phone?
democracy or enhance the potential for dictatorship? The internet is a double-edged tool. It has allowed dissidents who are operating in repressive contexts to have new audiences they would never have had, such as the protesters in 2019 in Moscow, who live streamed on Twitter themselves getting arrested, having millions and millions of views. However, the internet has allowed dictators to centralize and speed up the circulation of their propaganda. Now, this goes back all the way to the beginning of authoritarianism. Smart dictators, savvy dictators, have always known how to take the latest media technology and use it to their advantage. So Mussolini used newsreels, and he was a great performer. Hitler had that crazy ranting voice, so he was very effective
have
with radio.
anything good.
Modi of India, when
Anything
he
nice.
first ran for office, and he's the most followed leader on Instagram in the world right now, he used holograms. So he could be in 100 different cities at the same time. Up through Bolsonaro in Brazil and Trump, who used social media very, very effectively. So the internet is a tool like other tools before it. However, the internet has the ability to hugely increase the volume of propaganda and the circulation of propaganda. At E. Harding 2000 asks, is Orban a fascist? Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, has fascist qualities, but today, in the 21st century, fascism looks different. You have elections, you keep them going, but you manipulate the system by control of the media, by control of the judiciary and the election apparatus to make sure that the election goes out your way. Orban has become a hero to the new right because he has perfected what we call electoral autocracy. You keep elections going, but you find ways to get the results that you need. So that's different from old school fascism. Orban has gotten his cronies to buy important media properties, so it's indirect control of the media. And
doesn't Putin sort of do that too? Like he always wins.
You control the electoral system. You hollow out the institutions so that everybody's loyal to you. So these are things that go back to fascism.
What Trump's definitely
but today they take place within a multi-party state. One continuity of Orban with classic fascism is trying to grow the population, but only some people are encouraged to have babies, white Christians. Immigrants are not encouraged to have babies. Indeed, he's trying to get rid of immigrants and have them deported. Another continuity is homophobia. LGBTQ people have been legislated bureaucratically out of existence, and that goes back to fascism. Anybody who does not fit those roles of what they call the natural family, one man, one woman, both straight, does not have a future in Hungary. At OnziXS says, Pinochet was evil, but he made Chile what it is today. Benevolent dictator? I study dictators. I do not believe any dictator is benevolent because the definition of a dictator is someone who represses the popular will. There's no voting in a classic dictatorship. There's no free press. If you are an opponent of the regime, you will be sent to jail or killed. That's not, to me, the definition of benevolence. At Tyler E. Harris asks, honest question, But why do dictators even bother to hold elections? They're just going to rig anyway. Today, dictators keep elections going, and so we often call them authoritarians rather than dictators, but they rig the system through colonizing the media so the opposition's message can't get there. They'll put a prominent opponent under house arrest. That's what Vladimir Putin did with Alexei Navalny, who was extremely popular. He sent him to jail, so he couldn't be a candidate. So the new system is called electoral autocracy. You hold elections, but you use all these tricks to make sure that they're not free and fair elections. You can even, once you feel you've amassed enough power, hold an election and then just refuse to recognize the results if you have lost. And we have several examples of that recently. The biggest one in Venezuela, still playing out today. Maduro, who lost an election to the opposition, refused to leave office. In 2023, we had Bolsonaro trying to have a coup because he was claiming he actually won the election when he lost. And in the United States, Donald Trump claimed that he won the 2020 election when he did not. Epic Thundercat says, at what point do we start calling what Elon Musk is doing inside our government a coup? As a historian of coups, I consider this to be a situation that merits the word coup. So coups happen when people inside state institutions go rogue. This is different. This is unprecedented. A private citizen, the richest man in the world, has a group of 19, 20-year-old coders who have come in as shock troops and are taking citizens' data.
What we're looking March, beginning of March, then?
And closing down entire government agencies. When we think of traditional coups, often perpetrated by the military, you have foot soldiers who do the work of closing off the buildings, of making sure that the actual government, the old government they're trying to overthrow, can no longer get in. What we have here is a kind of digital paramilitaries, a group of people who have taken over and they've captured the data, they've captured the government buildings. They were sleeping there 24/7, and elected officials could not come in. When our own elected officials are not allowed to enter into government buildings because someone else is preventing them, who has not been elected or officially in charge of any government agency, that qualifies as a coup. Pat Berry, despondent American.
Weren't they doing that? Weren't they doing that? Weren't they stopping like senators and stuff from going in?
Asks, how do the oligarchs who help authoritarians come into power fare after the dictator has what he wants? Does he ever turn on them? Oligarchs are immensely wealthy and powerful individuals who can help to change the political environment by putting certain candidates in office. This was the case with Putin. He was chosen to run for president in 2000 by oligarchs. One of the pillars of authoritarianism is what's called authoritarian bargains. These are deals that leaders make with powerful people. They could be oligarchs in the media area, in finance and business. They could also be faith leaders. Some faith leaders are so powerful to be almost like oligarchs. And so these people team up. The dictator needs these people to legitimate them, to tell the rest of the population, because they're so influential, that this guy is actually okay. He may be violent, but he's our guy. The problem with this is inevitably, when the dictator has seen that the oligarch has outlived his usefulness, they will throw them under the bus. Early oligarchs who brought Putin to power, he tried to then colonize or seize their assets. And if they didn't agree to give him their assets, he tried to jail them or they had to go into exile. There's been something called sudden Russian death syndrome, where many, many powerful elites connected with the energy industry have fallen out of windows or gone into the hospital and never emerged again because Putin is cleaning house. Tanvir Hassan asks, how can a dictator be good for a nation? Dictators certainly want to be seen as being good for the nation. And many people become fans of dictators because dictators are into infrastructure. They have huge egos. They want to be identified with grandiose public works. Mussolini built sports stadiums. He built miles of railroads, and the myth was that he made the trains run on time. Hitler built the Autobahn, the high-speed highways. Today in Turkey, Turkey, Erdogan
Did he?
has very large
Wow.
construction projects such as the Istanbul Canal. And so there's a sense of modernity and things happening. The problem is when you don't have a free press, nobody can be tracking with accurate statistics how these big public works are affecting the
single
economy
line.
and what kind of corruption is happening behind the scenes. So dictators can attract a lot of support by people who fall for the appearances. Look, he's doing things. Other people are not doing things. The dictator gets things done. However, it's only later that the economic and social outcome of those big projects comes to light. Alex Gretsch asks, why do dictators love Trump? We know that Trump loves dictators.
Well-
He even has talked about exchanging love
Like,
letters with the
like.
leader of North Korea, not someone you would often think of as a particularly sentimental type. Do dictators love Trump? That's unclear. Dictators are transactional. They use each other. If dictators are loving Trump at the moment, it's because they think that he can be an ally, that they can get something
Or they
from
can
him.
get
If we
something
take
out
as
of
the
him, yeah.
example Vladimir Putin, he and Trump have a good relationship, and yet he allows Trump to be mocked on Russian television as a useful fool. So this is an example of them using each other, which is what
this is gonna
dictators
be
know how to
here.
do beautifully. At Eric E. Warren asks, why do dictators always blame media, opposition, foreign countries, and terror groups? Dictators are expert at creating a sense of existential dread. So it's not just polarization. We don't agree, but we're in the same framework. We agree to disagree. They go for what I call survivalism. It's me or you, and only one of us is going to survive. This is what the Nazis did with the Jews. This is what racists everywhere do with non-white peoples. They create a sense of existential dread that this group must be attacked, and sometimes, in the case of genocide, must
So
be
that we can
removed from the face
survive.
of the earth in order for our country to have peace and safety. Often,
Oh,
the
sounds
enemy is
interesting.
a foreign country, and there's a long history of dictators saying that their countries have been victimized. Mussolini talked about Italy.
Sarsaparilla. Sarsaparilla soda, please. Okay.
As victimized by more powerful countries, democracies, up to Xi Jinping, who has a long history of talking about Chinese victimization by the West, or Vladimir Putin, Russia's
Yes.
victimization.
We've run out of sarsaparilla. What the hell? Did you have the last of the sarsaparilla?
I made the sarsaparilla.
I don't think so. Okay. Well, anything. Anything will
I'll make
do.
something nice.
Make something yummy, yeah. I'm almost finished here.
By the West. And so these are very powerful narratives that can justify foreign invasion. The dictator says, we've been victimized.
sending
It's
me
time
crazy.
for us to protect ourselves by getting
said
more
it
territory.
there.
Here's a question from Magic. Is Xi Jinping a dictator? Not only is Xi Jinping a dictator, the communist system only permits dictators, but Xi Jinping is becoming more of a dictator. This is one way we
communist
can
system only
track how
permits
dictatorship
dictators.
expands. Is your personality cult becoming more prominent? Check. Xi Jinping's cult is becoming more prominent. Are you trying to rehabilitate past dictators to kind of bolster your own glory? Check. Xi Jinping is talking a lot about Mao and styling himself as the inheritor of Mao. Here's a question from Peter Quince. Why do dictators and wannabe dictators always want more land? That's kind of in the nature of being the dictator. You always want more power.
Maybe there's
you always
one
want
more
more
passage.
control. You also want more assets. You want more natural resources to exploit if
think
you're
so.
corrupt. The same narratives get put forth over and over again. Narratives of national purity. So, for example, the Nazis, it wasn't enough to have conquest of Germans. You had to go into Austria because there are people. Or you have these myths of national unification. And that's being used right now by Xi Jinping, a communist, for Taiwan, that Taiwan must be China because it needs to be reunified as though it was part of China to begin with. The same with Putin and Ukraine, that they called the conquest of Ukraine a reunification. So these are imperialist justifying narratives, and dictators use them over and over again. So it's no surprise to find President Trump a man of authoritarian leanings, having come back to power and becoming an imperialist, talking about Canada becoming the 51st American state, talking about taking control of Greenland. So those are all the questions for today. Thank you for watching.
Okay. I guess we will keep it at that for now. I still have some 300 odd pieces, and like we watched that whole documentary before that went for an hour, and I only had 270 pieces to put on. So I've still got some 300 pieces to put into here. And so next time I'll come in and do that and watch. I like I said, I had like a nuclear what a nuclear bomb explosion feels like. Isn't that fun? Doesn't that sound fun? And we also have A Day with the Doomsday Prepper in regional Victoria, which I did want to watch, and I went to watch it last time, I think, and I didn't watch it. Because I was like, oh, this seems a bit weird. But then, no, I actually want to watch that one. So we could delve into those next time and finish this off. I don't know whether to get in here one day. I'm thinking like one day off stream, just getting in here and trying to find this missing piece, this missing light that I can't find a spot for in this passageway. But then again, it could be that it's supposed to go here on the outside potentially. I don't know. So it may become more apparent if I do more building on it. So it just seems a bit strange. The passageways do seem like they're complete, and I'm just missing that one piece. I can't find that sort of light other than here. These two spots here have got that sort of light. Oh my gosh. These two spots here have a similar light, but the one underneath is different. It's one over here, but it's for the garage. So obviously when I put that together, that'll be from that. You would think then that a piece on this side would come from the outside. I don't know. Missing this one piece. It's so frustrating as to where it might be. So maybe I could come in and do that off stream, find this missing light, and then come in and finish the rest. I don't know. It's looking so cute. This is so cute. Okay. So that was that. So we got to build the World War II plane, which was pretty cool. I wanted to do that. I'll look at that. This World War II plane that we built. We got to sort of do that. You can see. And talked a bit about ANZAC Day. Talked a bit about my poppy. And watched some interesting documentaries where I learned a lot. All right. I am good to go. A choke right at the end. That is so cute. I love this game. All right. I shall see you all next time. Bye.